Welcome to This Explainer. Have you ever actually stopped to wonder if the world you see, the opinions you hold, and those snap judgments you make are, well, objectively true? Let's take a little journey right into the center of your own head to find out if your own thoughts might actively be lying to you every single day.
Okay, let's start right off the bat with a totally everyday, relatable scenario. Imagine your friend just got their grade back for a massive exam, and they completely failed. What is the very first thought that pops into your head, honestly? Do you immediately assume that the test was just brutally, unfairly hard? Or, deep down, do you kind of jump to the conclusion that they were simply too lazy to study and spent way too much time scrolling on their phone? Hold on to that thought, because your answer actually reveals a massive invisible gear turning inside your cognitive machinery.
All right, let's dive into Section 1, Social Perception and the Brain's Blame Game.
So, to understand this, I want you to picture your brain as this tiny, incredibly overworked detective sitting in a dark room. Every single time you meet someone or witness an event, this little detective has to make a judgment in mere milliseconds. It has to instantly decipher other people's intentions. To pull this off, it uses a built-in shortcut called attribution theory to assign blame or credit. There are generally two ways, two main categories for how our inner detective cracks a case. On one side, we have internal attribution. This is when we decide that a failure is due to someone's internal character flaw. For example, they didn't study, they're unmotivated, it is entirely their fault. On the flip side, we have external attribution. This is when we blame the environment, like the exam was unfairly hard, the room was too noisy, it was just a stroke of bad luck.
But here is exactly where the brain completely trips itself up, leading to literally one of the most common cognitive flaws we humans possess, the fundamental attribution error. This is our overwhelming tendency to blame other people's mistakes on their deep-rooted character flaws, while simultaneously giving ourselves a total free pass by blaming our own identical mistakes on external circumstances. Seriously, if your friend fails, they're lazy. But if you fail that exact same exam, well, the professor asked trick questions, obviously. It perfectly proves that our perception isn't some objective camera recording reality. It's a highly subjective, biased storyteller.
Which brings us to Section 2. The engine room. Why does the brain even need these shortcuts?
Now, what's absolutely crucial to understand here is that these biases, they aren't a sign of stupidity, and they definitely aren't a character defect. In fact, they are a highly advanced evolutionary survival mechanism. Think about it. Your brain makes up only about 2% of your body weight, but it burns a massive amount of your daily energy. It literally cannot afford to carefully analyze every single piece of data it gets. As researcher Ozgun Ozakai points out, to use our limited cognitive capacity effectively, we rely on patterns built from the past. It's a biological heritage. Imagine your brain as a frantic, cartoonish switchboard operator from the 1920s. This operator is getting absolutely flooded with thousands of calls, sensory inputs, and social cues every single second. To survive without short-circuiting, the operator has to use templates and shortcuts to instantly route the calls. These shortcuts keep us alive, even if they sometimes route a call to the wrong destination.
And building heavily on that biological reality is an incredible point made by neuroscientist and media psychology professor Dr. Maren Erner. She points out that our biological machinery is so deeply hardwired to jump to rapid conclusions that bias is just an unavoidable default setting. Take the negativity bias, for example. That's our tendency to focus heavily on bad news rather than good news. Because, noticing a predator kept our ancestors alive a lot better than noticing a pretty flower. Our brains still prioritize negative information today. It's an automatic reflex that even the most highly trained professionals cannot simply hit delete on.
So, what do we do about it? Let's look at Section 3, the toolkit. 5 critical thinking methods straight from journalism. Okay, so we can't uninstall our brain's factory settings, right? But we absolutely are not helpless victims here. We can use a professional-grade toolkit borrowed from constructive, objective journalism to train our conscious minds to catch those unconscious shortcuts in the act. Whether you're consuming the news, arguing with a coworker, or judging a friend's exam score, these 5 steps are the circuit breakers you need. We're talking about seeing the whole picture, holding contradictions together, observing your own thoughts, considering psychology, and remembering your impact. These are exactly what you need to stop your brain from jumping to an unfair conclusion. Let's break these down to see how they actually work in the real world.
Let's start with steps 1 and 2. When our brain takes a shortcut, it usually creates a black and white narrative because, let's face it, that's just easier to process. But reality is multi-layered. Step 1 is forcing yourself to ask, wait, what missing piece of context am I ignoring right now?
Gathering this full context prevents what psychologists call the illusion of explanatory depth. That's basically our arrogant tendency to believe we understand a complex topic way better than we actually do. And then step 2 requires us to accept contradictions. Two conflicting things can be true at the exact same time. A friend can be generally hardworking, but also have failed because of a poorly designed test. Holding those contradictions stops the brain from forcing a false, simplistic narrative.
Moving right along to steps 3 and 4. This is where the real self-awareness kicks in. Step 3 asks you to step back and become a neutral observer of your own mind. When you feel yourself instantly disliking someone or getting defensive about a piece of information, just pause. Catch yourself in real time. This is how you defeat confirmation bias. The brain's nasty habit of only accepting information that proves what it already believes. Step 4 ties right into this by explicitly asking you to embrace human psychological boundaries. Just recognize that your brain is a biological processor doing its best. By acknowledging those limits, you open the door to genuine curiosity instead of rigid judgment.
And that brings us to the final step in our toolkit, remembering your impact. Dr. Erner sums this up perfectly. When we let our cognitive biases run wild, we don't just distort our own reality, we actively distort the reality of everyone we communicate with. Whether you're a journalist writing an article or just a person gossiping with a friend over coffee, the way you process and share information literally shapes the worldviews and even the neural pathways of the people listening to you. Choosing to use critical thinking isn't just about making yourself smarter. It's about taking responsibility for the reality you are helping to build for others.
Let's wrap this up with Section 4, rebuilding your reality and taking control of the shortcuts. Look, your brain is a magnificent, totally efficient survival engine. You can't just uninstall the software that creates cognitive biases, fundamental attribution errors, or the need for mental shortcuts. But what you can do, starting right now, is consciously choose to take the wheel. By recognizing that perception is an active construction project happening inside your mind, you get to choose the building materials. So I want to leave you with one final provocative thought. Tomorrow, you are going to interact with a stranger. They might cut you off in traffic, they might be a little rude at the coffee shop, or they might just give you a weird look. Knowing what you know now, knowing that your brain is desperately trying to use an evolutionary shortcut to label them as a bad person, how will you judge them? Are you going to let that tiny detective jump to conclusions, or will you pull out your new cognitive toolkit and look at the bigger picture? The choice of what reality you live in is entirely up to you. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and hey, keep questioning your reality.